Hello, welcome back. Yes, today it's all about monsters, more monsters. Bring on the monsters and Shadowdark stat blocks, making that monster, that infamous monster, the Rot Grub. Going to be an interesting process. I have had a few sort of technical problems trying to figure out exactly what to do with this. I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll if you want to. And grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable because we're going to get incredibly disgusting and horrible and highly deadly today. Okay, let's get started. Hi, welcome to HowtoRPG. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about tabletop role-playing games, and we're dealing with monsters, and the game system is Shadowdark RPG. I've been playing a lot of this, running a lot of this, and making a lot of monsters. And I've also sort of put together a collection of data so that I can figure out how to make them, because the book gives you about half the information you need. And we're going to deal with the Rot Grub. A swarm of Rot Grubs is what we want. Usually AD&D refers to them as just one grub, because one grub is bad enough. But a swarm of them is really bad. So let's kind of have a look at how we can go about making something like this that's interesting, but highly deadly, of course, because that's what the Rot Grub is. I'm going to make it clear now that I have done some of the work in advance, and I'll explain how I went about doing this. I will show you the table that I've used to build it from, and give you an idea of sort of my approach so that you can make your own monsters, because we want that to happen. Okay. Recently I have, in conjunction with AJ Pickett and Wally DM, Mitchell Reed and David Bailey, we've put together a book, a Shadowdark Players Expansion for Shadowdark RPG. You can pay what you want. I'll put a link to it in the description, and it should be in the description as well, the link to this, but I'll put it in the chat as well. If you haven't had a look at that and checked it out, by all means do so. Hello, Fred Huber. Fred Huber is a patron and a moderator, and I'm going to get straight into this. We want to get on with the process. I'm going to be fairly quick. My intention is to make all of these particular live streams very, very fast, rather than my traditional an hour or more long. Yeah, we're going to be quick. Okay, so here is the table that I worked from, that I've created. Now, I've put this up on my Patreon. It is free. It's for free memberships, so you still have to join, but as part of the free membership, so that you can go through and figure out how to make your monsters, okay, for Shadowdark. So I use this, but you'll see there's a lot of wide variety in terms of what's going on here. So there's a couple of things that I discovered when I was looking at the monster. The first problem is that, one, Shadowdark doesn't have one, possibly because it's considered intellectual property. So for me, the Rot Grub is the parasitic worm. Basically, it's a parasitic worm, okay? The other problem is that if you look at AD&D first, it doesn't really give you quite enough information to figure out how to make a swarm, but it gives you enough to tell you what a one Rot Grub will do. And then AD&D, the second version, also the same sort of problem. So I started looking around, and I had a look at Volo's Guide to Monsters, which is 5e, and almost immediately I decided this was not really what I wanted, because I don't think it's designed very well. It's still fairly deadly, but it's not designed very well. So I wanted to do something else with it, and we're doing Shadowdark. So here's our worksheet, and let me just go through a couple of the things that I decided to do with this monster. Now, by the way, the artwork is by AJ Pickett. And you'll find a link to a video on the Rot Grub on his YouTube channel if you want to go and watch that and know about the lore. But here is what I have so far. Okay, it's a mass of white finger-sized maggots, and these diseased worms eat living and dead creatures. And they'll literally just eat their way to any of your internal organs, your heart, your liver, your lungs, your kidneys, your brain. Like that's its target. So what I initially did is I took the concept of the spider swarm, a swarm of spiders, and I used that monster level, which is why it's marked as 2. And then I took what is the shadow from Shadowdark, the shadow monster, and I took its final sort of drain life feature, and I made that disease. And I made a little bit of an adjustment so that it's not absolutely identical, but it's pretty close to the shadow. Okay, the difference being that it targets something like I guess it's designed to target strength rather than constitution. And then I was looking around at sort of other diseases, and I was looking at rats and anything that produced a disease. And the thing that sort of became obvious is that rot grubs kind of act like a disease. Okay, it's an infection and it's fairly bad. So it's a combination of 3 monsters essentially. What I'm doing here, it's the spider swarm, which I started with, which I may not stay with, the shadow, and the rat, because the rat seemed like the next most sensible thing to base it off, because rats have a thing called disease, and something like the rat swarm. It basically, it's got a, it works almost identical in most ways. The only difference is that the disease that it's operating on is not every round. It's like during the answer a day. You repeat the check per day, but rot grubs work much faster. So it's a very big, huge mix of different ideas. So what I wanted to do is, so I get this clear in my head and clear to you, since I'm basing it off 3 different monsters, the shadow, the rat, the disease from that, the spider swarm, I have to decide, is the monster level important for this particular thing? And one of the first things I discovered is the only way in Shadowdark to get rid of this is to probably get rid of, to use something like Restoration that the priest has. And you would have to be level 5 and select that spell as your priest spell to be able to use Restoration. I think that that's probably one of the better spells to select if you are a priest. But that means that, if I make it a level 2 monster, it's going to cut through level 1 and 2 characters pretty quickly. And it probably shouldn't be presented as a monster for level 1 and 2, unless, of course, you want a high body count. It's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do something else. So I had to think about this, and then I looked at all the different swarms, and all the swarms seem to range between monster level 2 and level 6. Level 2 and 6. So I've decided 5, because I went back and I had a look at AD&D, and they said you usually find between 5 and 20 of these grubs together. So these are your swarm. So let's go with 1 grub being monster level 1, and because it's quite dangerous, and then let's go for 5 of these things. That's a swarm. Okay, so let's go with monster level 5, because this is probably one of the more dangerous swarms that you could ever possibly face. It's pretty brutal. I don't really want level 1 and level 2 characters having to face this. Certainly not level 1. Okay, so let's push this a little bit higher and go 5 and start there. And then going through and looking at our table, we can figure out the rest of this. So level 5, so we should be probably having between a 0 and a 6 for our attack. 2 or 3 attacks is what we should be looking at. Okay, that's good to know. Our armor class could be anything. Again, we could 8 through to 17 if we really wanted to. I don't think that traditionally that the armor class of these things was supposed to be that great. So what I am doing, and I think this is what Kelsey does quite a lot, is she takes 5e, AD&D, she starts with that, and she uses 5e, and she starts using numbers off that. So I started looking at, like, what's an equivalent in Shadowdark in terms of what it's trying to do. And we'll work with that as our gauge, okay? So the first thing is, I'm going to say armor class doesn't need to be high. We can probably have it be quite low. It could be an 8, it could be a 9, Okay, I feel like it's very close to something like the Scarab Swarm. Like a Scarab Swarm feels like they might be better armored. But then Spider, as I said, the Spider Swarm was another one that I was looking at, and I was thinking, okay, spiders and Spider Swarms, they're not really armored. They're pretty soft, and we can probably use the Spider as a good sort of starting point. And they have an armor class of 13 as well. But I don't want these things to be particularly armored. They should be soft and sort of, vulnerable. Okay, so that's sort of where my head was at. I don't want them to be too dexterous. I don't want them to be able to move around too fast. So we probably need to tone all of that down a little bit. So there's where my head is at. This is why I've started putting some of these numbers in and where they are for that very, very reason. So I'm going to go, let's go with not at that absolute below the, right down the bottom. We're going to go with like a 9 for the armor class. So it's pretty easy to hit. I want them to be able to hit this thing, okay? The number of hit points for a monster, if we make it challenge rating 5, is determined here. Anywhere from 21 through to a 26 is quite common. We also have to decide, what's the constitution of this monster going to be? And I've decided that constitution is going to be 0. Like, it's not going to be particularly great or particularly bad. It's just 0, okay? That makes it easy. Most monsters don't have -1s to the constitution in Shadowdark anyway. So we can probably figure out that our average is going to be about 22. Okay, now why is that? Because the calculation for hit points is an 8-sided dice, which means you're using the average, 4.5 times your monster level, plus your constitution modifier. Okay, that's the process of figuring out what it should be. So 4.5 would be the average, multiply that by 5 because that's the monster level, we get that. Then we add constitution modifier plus 0, and it's 22. So we round down after that. So 22 is where we should be sitting. 22. That's why that table has that average included. I don't want to give it too many attacks because that would just make it even more ruthless. So we're going to go, we can have between 2 and 3 attacks. I'm going to go with 2. I think 1 would be ridiculous. That's just not enough. But anywhere from 2 to 3 would be a reasonable number of attacks. Okay. The next one is, let's deal with the, what's the next thing on our list? So we've done that. It's a bite. So we're dealing with a bite. And we want to decide what our attack bonus is going to be. Now, you can have quite a wide range of different attack bonuses for your monster. It's not really a huge problem. But here, anywhere from 0 through to 6 for your attack. But you're dealing with characters who are level 5. They probably have better armor and better armor class by now in Shadowdark. Even, Shadowdark's pretty sort of average. Even it doesn't really, your armor class doesn't change that much, okay? So we don't have to get too crazy. But I'm going to say at probably the very least we want to have at least a 5, but we could go as low as a 4. We could go as high as a 6, but I don't want to do that. That would be to make it too hard. So let's just make it a 4. So let's go with it being the monster level and then go down 1, and that's fine there. So let's set that right there as a 4. And then how much damage does it do? Well, I don't want to make it do too much damage. So for monster level 5, anywhere from a D6 to a D8, I don't want to make it do a lot of damage because it's the disease aspect that it's really the worst part of this monster. So let's go through and take the D6 instead rather than the D4. It's a little bit low. And then we add disease, so you're going to have to roll for this if you get bitten by this horrible thing. It's not going to move fast. I don't want to have it near. That makes no sense whatsoever. I think what we should do is we should have it moving very, very slow. It's the sort of thing that you will discover, and that's where it becomes a risk to you. I'm going to make this close. Very few monsters have a movement of close, which is like 5 feet. It's not very fast at all. Okay, close. So most monsters have near. This one needs to move a lot slower, so I'm going to make it close. Okay, now how much are all of its stats going to be? Now I was looking at a lot of the monsters that were included in sort of the the Shadowdark book, trying to determine roughly where I should be sitting with the strength of this monster. It's not very strong, and so I think Kelsey has said many times, try to base your monster on something that already exists and use that as a reference point. She was referring to the elephant in Shadowdark as a reference point. I'm going to use things that are similar. So I'm going to look at swarms and decide where I want my strength to sit. How low do I want it to really go? Like, you know, that's sort of the gist of this. So the strength for a spider swarm is -1. Okay, so -1 is not bad. It's certainly better than what I've got there right now. And then we have I believe it is a scarab swarm, which is where is it? This is a -1 as well. I can sort of see that maybe grubs are maybe not as strong as scarabs and spiders. Maybe they're a little bit weaker because they are like grubs. And then, you know, if we start looking at other things like snakes and so forth, we're probably getting into a difficult situation because they are significantly different in size and nature. So I think maybe that's sort of where we need to be hitting, is something that's under that. So instead of -1, let's go with a -2. Your attack bonus does not have to correlate with your dexterity modifier and your strength modifier, okay? But it does have to, in some way, your attack bonus should not be lower than your strength or dexterity modifier. It can be higher, but not lower. That's as far as I can tell in terms of the design of the monsters in this game. Okay, so that's what I would do, and we're going to check one other. There's a swarm of centipedes. I feel like centipedes are probably fairly strong, even in a swarm. So maybe that's not a good measure. But I'm assuming they're probably like a -1 to their strength. So that's probably I think we're probably in the right track with this. And where are we? Moving through centipedes. Okay, we're almost there. Here we go. So centipedes, their strength is a -3. So they're actually quite weak. This is possibly why I've marked it as a -3, because in 5e they're actually a -4. So we could probably go down even lower. I guess the only problem is that, you know, even the attack bonus for this monster, it's monster level 4, but it's got an attack bonus of 3. Then it does have a positive to its dexterity, which is sort of another thing. Are we going to go with it being fast? No, I don't think we are. Are we going to make them weaker than that? Well, I think we can probably go weaker because it can be based on either one. So we'll just go to -3. We'll stick with that. Got that. We're going to lock in our dexterity. I don't think our dexterity needs to be that good. I think -1. They're worms. They wriggle around. And then intelligence. Most swarms and so forth are not very intelligent. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the -4. It's wisdom. I don't think it needs to be very high. I'm going to stick with the -4. I think that's all good too. And then I think the other thing we can consider is charisma. Like, most of these things don't have a high charisma. We don't have to give these a high charisma. They're not going to talk to you, so why would you want to bother? I don't feel like they are vicious. Neutral as an alignment seems reasonable because they're just trying to survive and eat, and they just happen to eat you. Okay? So I think most of the bits and pieces we need are here. I did notice that, you know, it's a +3 to bite with a spider swarm, with a centipede swarm. Okay, so that's +1. I'm not sure that I like that for a challenge rating or a level 4 monster. I'm thinking we're going to go with just the +4 and just assume that because of its sheer numbers, we're going to go with the higher number there. That's probably where I want to go. Okay, so now, why did I do this disease thing? This, like I said, is based off the disease that's in Shadowdark and the shadow. So I went with a DC 12 Constitution check because I felt like that was probably the right number for the level of the monster I had intended it to be. And I had based it off something that produced a disease, and so I use that number. It could be a 12, could be a 9. We can make it a lot lower, so it's not going to kick in quite so often, and that would sort of help. I think it's really going to come down to testing whether a 9 or a 12 for a constitution check is the right number to select. Okay, for me right now, I figure that this is roughly about 50-50 chance, and then you take 1d4 constitution damage. Okay, it's not drain, it is damage. So once it's gone, it's gone. And you repeat this check once per round, which is rough. So there's a good chance it's going to take, probably for a really weak constitution character, it might take 2 or 3 rounds to finally kill them off, and they got to figure out some way of dealing with them. Usually you use fire to scorch little suckers, so you kill them off as quickly as you possibly can by doing that. Or you're going to die if you reach 0 constitution. So it's a very, very vicious monster, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to make it a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 monster, because out of all the swarms, I honestly think this is probably one of the most ruthless things you could possibly make. I don't have a problem with making ruthless, but if it's going to be a really tough monster, its monster level needs to be reflective of that. Not because of the other numbers, but because of its special ability. And its special ability is really, really tough to deal with. So this is kind of why I've gone with this approach. I'm going to see what other people have to say, and then we'll lock that down, and hopefully you're going to be making your own stuff. For those of you who haven't figured out, I really want you to make your own monsters. And I know that some of you are trying, so by all means, if this helps you work towards that, great. Okay, we let the party try cutting them out, doing damage, making a skill check to see if it works. Yeah, very squishy. Yeah, they are squishy, and they should be squishy. Does constitution damage decrease the constitution? Yes, it does. So if your constitution score... yes, it does. But remember, constitution scores will only reduce it by a certain amount. It's not going to... So, for example, what's the best way I can explain this? Think about it this way. If you have a constitution of 10 and you suffer the disease from the rot worm, and you roll a 4-sided dice because you failed the save, and you're going to lose some of your con. Okay? Your con is going to go down. It was 10, which is basically a 0 modifier. Well, now what's going to happen is you're going to take that number, and if you roll a 2 on the 4-sided dice, you then take away 2. You now have 8 left. That's your score, is now an 8. Now, when you're on an 8, that is a -1 con modifier. So you would apply that once to your maximum hit points, because it's only ever applied once, not multiple times, right? So if you're level 5 and say you had, I don't know, if you're lucky and you had 20 hit points, you'd go down to 19 hit points. But say on the second round, you still can't deal with the worms, and you roll a 4-sided dice and you roll a 4 and you're really unlucky. So now, instead of being an 8 for your constitution score, not your modifier, it's going to go down by 4 more points. So now you only have a constitution of 4. You're getting closer and closer to death, okay? Because as soon as it gets to 0, you will be dead. That'll be it. But how does that reflect how many actual hit points you have? Well, 4, the con modifier for a 4, when you're building your character, I believe it is something like a -3. So you had 20 hit points. Instead of taking away 1, now you deduct another 2, which is from your original total of 20, you'd be deducting 3, because a 4 stat is a -3 modifier. So then that means you only have 17 hit points. But you're also taking damage. So your maximum hit points are reducing, and your hit points will be reducing because you will be taking damage from the monster. Okay? So you can kind of see how that's going to work, hopefully. Hopefully it's clear. Somebody was in chat, and I was trying to keep up with your question. So yes, it will keep decreasing. You know, if you keep taking more damage, it's going to get worse. So again, next round you make your save, you fail it again if you do, and you roll your 4-sided dice. Maybe you get 2. Well, now you're down to just 2 hit points for your score. So what is the modifier now? It's a -4. If you started off with 20 hit points as your maximum, well, your maximum hit points is now only 16 because it's a -4 for the modifier. And then next round comes, you fail it again, and you get another 2 or 3 hit points that you have to take off. You're now down to 0, and your character dies. Can you see why I've made it such a high level monster? It's because it is potentially really, really bad. Do you know what I mean? And even if you can get rid of the worms with restoration, the damage done to your constitution cannot be repaired. It's not going to come back. So it is a fairly nasty monster, which is why I've made it such a high level. Any case, let's quickly go back, just review what we've done here, and then we'll get out of here, and you can get on with your day, and I'll get on with my day. So as I said before, this table here is available on my Patreon as a free member. You can download it, use it, work with it. There's a lot of movement, so there's plenty of movement to make mistakes, and there's plenty of movement to not make mistakes, because remember, Shadowdark is more bound than most systems. You know, bound accuracy is a bit more applicable to this game system. So it's available there. You can also grab this stat block. If you are a paid member, you will get all the monsters that I make for Shadowdark and everything else that I've made as well on Patreon. I just keep putting them up there. I keep updating the document and adding in new monsters so that you can use them. And of course, make adjustments if you need to, and you feel like it doesn't work the way you think it should work, then do that. There's nothing wrong with that. All part and parcel of the process. Okay, so I'm going to keep doing that. The other thing that I want to mention again very quickly is I come back, and every week I make another monster. I was making 5e monsters, now I'm doing Shadowdark monsters. I have every intention of keeping on making Shadowdark monsters. By all means, go and download that Pay What You Want Players Expansion for Shadowdark RPG, for those of you who need new things for your players to play around with and try out. So I'll just put that link in again. It's down in the description as well. My Patreon's down there as well. We've been far worse would have been far worse if Con's bonus was added to HP at every level. Yeah, absolutely. But that's not how Shadowdark works. You only apply the Constitution modifier once, and so that at least means that it's not quite as ruthless. If you were applying it to something like 5e, it would be a ruthless monster. Okay. But if you're doing it in Shadowdark, it's not quite as bad. I know people say that Shadowdark's more deadly. So far, my players are level 7, and none of them have died. They've been very close, and including at level 7, I almost killed a couple of them. But it has not happened so far. And I have been trying to work very hard with the guidelines that are provided in the book and online, and they're still alive. But they are scared as hell, I can tell you that now. I like Constitution Drain to be similar to 5e Exhaustion. Recovers a point per long rest, or per rest. There's only a rest in Shadowdark, so that's another thing to consider. Okay, so again, out of all the monsters I've made on the channel, this is probably one of the most deadly ones. I would test it and be very, very careful. Test it, try it out, see if it works, make adjustments, because it would be very easy for this to wind up being a little bit too much for people to deal with. If your characters die the first time you use it, that's not a big deal. But if every time you use it, there's always fatalities, maybe it's a bit too much. Or you're putting a level 5 monster against characters who are level 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and maybe they're just not ready for that yet. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of where my head is at with regard to this. What am I doing next week? We're going to do another Shadowdark monster next week. I think we're going to keep going with the Shadowdark thing. I've enjoyed making them. They don't take me forever. I feel like trying to explain how to do it is much easier compared to 5e, and I'm all for you being able to play your game in such a way that it feels like you can actually do something with it. Like, you know what I mean? I want you to be able to make your own stuff. I think that's really, really important. I'm going to put in my Discord link. I don't dish it out that often, just because, you know, I'm on there quite a lot, but yeah, it's not, you don't have to be a patron to use the Discord link, by the way. I like to pair Rot Grubs with some Sons of... I bet you do. I bet you do. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to let you get on with your day. I've talked long enough. This is half an hour of me jumbling around. What a waffly nonsense that was. Okay, anyway, so huge thank you to everybody who's been here. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you to everybody who was in chat, who was commenting. I do appreciate it. So Fred Huber. Now, I'm not going to get the name right. Yeah. You know who you are. I was answering your questions before. Hello, Calrel. How are you doing? Thank you for taking part in the poll, too. There were 3 of you that did actually take part in the poll. Have you created Rot Grubs for your tabletop role-playing games? Yes, 33%. No, 33%. Just watching, 33%. Interesting. Okay. Huge thank you to all my patrons who support me on Patreon so I can keep doing this. I want to keep doing this. AJ is going to keep drawing artwork for the monsters. I'll keep making the monsters, and we'll bring it all together at some point. I don't know when that's going to be, but the target is 100 monsters, and then we'll make a digital book. Okay, probably going to be pay what you want. The first draft anyway. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours, and hey, till next time. Be careful of those Rot Grubs. No, I'm only kidding. Keep rolling those 20s.